So because we always want to give a fun tip, Shamus, I got to do this. This is the SEO tip of the day: how to train your dog to hunt rats. That will appear.
We don't mind a good animal story.
And that's going to be one that we will be picking up.
So tends to get the most viewers.
Good. Well, we're going to jump right to it. So, Gina, a question I want to have that you can share with our audience here is tell us about Resolve Philly, your work there, and when we talked earlier about your growth, how quickly you all grew, and then the challenges and leading through it, and what learnings can you share by everything you went through with the audience here?
Yep. Great. Thanks, Manny. Nice to see everyone. Jean Friedman-Rudovsky, co-founder and executive director of Resolve Philly. We are a local newsroom in Philadelphia. I am wearing a green skirt because the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Go Birds.
Go Birds.
But we are a local newsroom that serves underrepresented communities throughout the city. We fill information gaps and increase community participation in journalism through a neighborhood-based approach. We didn't start out with this focus. We evolved over time. I co-founded Resolve Philly in 2018 along with Cassie Haynes. And we were originally sort of the holders of what is now the Philadelphia Journalism Collaborative. So we started out as a vehicle for collaboration and solutions reporting in Philadelphia, but always with the end goal of serving communities who had been long harmed or excluded by mainstream media narratives in the city. And so we evolved over time to develop our own editorial work in addition to facilitating collaboration throughout the city. And we grew a lot. When Cassie and I joined together in 2018, we had a budget of $300,000. And by the time we hit 2024, last year, our approved budget was over $4 million. We had a full-time staff of 24 people, 24 incredible human beings. And we had an over-reliance on philanthropy. It was not for lack of trying. We tried to be really creative in alternative revenue streams, tech development, a consulting practice, just trying to get beyond kind of the normal channels. And last year, things shifted dramatically. The fundraising climate felt like it kind of fell out from under our feet. We hit a wall. We didn't have reserves that had been built up. And so starting in sort of the spring, we're discussing a small amount of layoffs that we might have to do towards the end of the year. And I was following guidance of my COO, who I thought was doing sort of accurate planning and projecting of what we would have to do as a leadership team towards the end of the year. And then in September, Crisis hit. My COO went out on emergency medical leave, and I realized that we were in a much worse financial state than I had realized. And we needed to make incredibly swift and really painful decisions over the course of about 10 days. There's no way we could have gotten through the end of the year with the size of the team that we had. And so, realized very quickly we had to make some really, really tough decisions. So basically over the course of 10 days, called an emergency board meeting, worked with my chief programs officer, Sarah Shariari, who's right here, who will be stepping in as ED when I step down in April, which had long been planned. Put together 3 scenarios for our board to choose from, one of which was sunsetting the organization. The other 2 were deep cuts. Gave them the power and authority to make that decision, which they did within a couple days, and 48 hours later, we had a meeting with the staff. Most of our board was present. I explained a longer version of the narrative I just gave you, and then had 11 back-to-back meetings laying off folks on my team. And I realized at that time that I, in the course of those 10 days, felt completely ill-equipped at that moment to sort of face what I was facing. And so I leaned on talking to other leaders in the field who had dealt with crisis management, some of whom I knew, some of whom I was connected to, including Kate Myers, who is in this room right here. And realized I got a lot of tips about navigating crises and how to do that, and felt like that was important to share. So I'm just going to share, thanks for the patience with that background, but want to get to just like the 3 learnings and 3 takeaways I have from that time period. One, there are no good decisions, right? Every decision felt like it was terrible for a million different reasons. And so we based decisions on 2 things, our values and the data that we had at hand. Example of the values is we chose to give the folks we were laying off 3 weeks of severance. That was a hard decision given the little money that we had and also trying to hustle for gap funding, but felt like that was more in line with our values, and the 40, 45K hit that we took of that, we were willing to swallow that to not just put people out on the street the next day. Database decision, we had thankfully just last year done a strategic plan. And so when it came down to making the hard decisions about who we needed to let go, it was actually really clear which positions were core to the organization's work going forward, and that's how we made our decision. Learning number 2, which is what many of the leaders who I talked to told me during that time, be as aggressive as you can when you are making these decisions, because you don't want to have to do it twice. It would have been so much worse to be kind of conservative, or not conservative, but just hold back because we felt really bad, and then 2 months later, it would have I think gutted the organization over time. And the third is to be transparent, both with your team, with your board, with your funders. This is a really hard space to be in, and folks understand that. And if you can explain what happened, it instills a lot more confidence over time. So those are some of the first lessons.
Thank you for that. And speaking of transparency, Shamus, one thing that moved me talking to you was just how transparent you were with your team and with the community. You were managing editor of DNA Chicago when your one funder decided, he's going to shutter it. But just, I'd love for you to talk more for our audience here about your rallying cry once your donor went away, the transparency that you showed about rebuilding your organization, building trust, and also just what inspired you to move forward.
Thanks, Manny. Yes, my crisis is more of a historical crisis. Block Club came out of DNAInfo, and really what happened was DNAInfo was a for-profit, single owner, and it was relying entirely on digital advertising and the largesse of our owner. We were around for 5 years in Chicago, and editorially, we did great. We really built up an audience in Chicago. Our niche was, let's cover just the Chicago neighborhoods, neighborhood by neighborhood. We put one reporter into a neighborhood or two. They cover the geographic area, and anything that moves in there, they cover it. They're all general assignment reporters. And it was the thing that had really been cut out of the legacy, the Trib and the Sun-Times. They had really cut the neighborhood coverage. So when DNA came in and started covering, little community meetings and the mom and pop shop that opened on the corner, and just fun things, difficult things, but really sort of like a small town paper mentality, but in 77 different neighborhoods. So people really liked that, and there was a big need for it. So unfortunately, we were not making enough money to cover a very large newsroom. And there were many things that went into it, but eventually we lost the interest of the owner, and he shut us down. Very little notice. I did not have 3 months of runway to start warning people. I mean, we knew there were clouds on the horizon, but I got about 3 hours notice, and then we went dark. So I would say the upside of that, besides me and 50 people getting laid off in one day, was the way Chicago reacted to it. They immediately went to our site, and there was a huge sign up there saying we're closed. The net effect of that is they put the banner up on every page, like all our archive pages. So people were like, oh, the 5 years of reporting has been wiped out. There was a huge outcry, and I have to hand it to the rest of the Chicago media. Everyone wrote about us or put us on TV, or we couldn't do appearances at that point, but everyone wrote about us that this had happened, and so the whole city knew our story. And so we were able to really flip that, say, after we all got done, crying and drinking, and all the things that we did as a staff, like in the day that followed, we started getting these emails and tweets, and everyone was just offering support. And it wasn't just support like, thoughts and prayers. It was like they said, hey, if we had known you were struggling, if you had asked us to support you, if you had maybe like a donor model or a subscription model, we would have supported that. I wish you would have done that. And so it was like the light bulb moment a couple days afterwards that said, hey, what happens if we just did it without him? What if we figured out, what did we do well and what didn't we do well? And let's just lean into that. So one of the big takeaways was, after talking to a couple potential funders, was that it probably made sense for us to be a nonprofit. What we really wanted to do was just put the reporters back on the streets and covering Chicago. It wasn't like the old place where we're trying to necessarily monetize local news, and we watched that it wasn't going to happen under that plan. So we really just, let's figure out, okay, how many people can we realistically afford to pay? Who's going to get us off the ground? And how do we go back to doing that and communicate that with all of our readers, that if you liked us over here, we're the same thing, but we're a little bit different. We're going to be a little bit more responsive to the communities. So the fact that the rest of the Chicago media got behind us, and then they wrote about our launch, and so it was very collaborative. Chicago is a very special ecosystem when it comes to the news. We're, it's a big city, but it's a small, band of media folks, and so we all really support each other, and that's kind of gone on now. Like, we collaborate with a lot of small newsrooms in Chicago now, and we've grown to, we're at about 38 people now, so we've lasted longer than DNAInfo, and we're about the same size now, so it's so far so good.
That's a great success story. That's wonderful. So in my current job, I also find myself, besides running a newsroom, is I'm helping to write grants and going out and going on calls with our development folks. I want to address the issue of now financing, donor relations, and so forth. One of the questions that we talked about putting together had to do for folks in the audience who would be funders, as well as have an interest in being donors and so forth. So, Gene, I wanted to ask you about fundraising is constant, but talk about your experience with donor relations, managing boards. What's a takeaway from that for you that you can share with our audience?
Yeah. Maybe start with the board part first. I would say the other thing that really, really made a huge difference for us when we hit our crisis moment is that our board stepped up and was prepared to play the role that they needed to play. Liza Gross is here. She's our co-chair of the board. I worked really hard on developing the board over the last couple of years. We started out with sort of a typical, as what it said, founders board, right? Folks who are friends with the founders, who you ask to help you out. And then at some point, it really has to move on from that. And so I worked really hard with the board, who is a wonderful group of people, and they really played the role that they needed to play, meaning, Sarah and I put together scenarios, and the decision was in their hands. They did a lot of, they asked an incredible amount of really good questions to really kind of poke at the different ways that we were thinking of solving this problem in the short and long term. And so that was clutch and crucial. When it comes to funders and funder relationships, so on the sort of, those 10 days there, there was the work with Sarah and the leadership team thinking about the scenario planning, and then I was, every other hour on calls with funders who we had longstanding relationships with, explaining to them also what had happened. And several of them really came through for us with gap funding, with early disbursements, with showing up in our hour of need, and we're incredibly grateful for that. I think what made a difference there is, first and foremost, the work was worth saving. Similarly to how you say your readers reacted, folks saw the value of what we do and didn't want that to go away. Again, the transparency, this didn't come totally out of nowhere. I had also been telling funders, this is a hard year. I had been, kind of prepping them for that, not for the crisis, because I didn't know that would come. But they were sort of along for the ride because we keep in close touch. But I also feel like I got some learnings of how funders can show up in real ways. And it's not just about providing money when there is a crisis. So I think the first learning or sort of hope I would have for funders in the room is, first of all, kind of over the long term, be open to grantees being able to tell you that things aren't going great, because they don't always go great. And being able to have your grantees be really honest with you over the long term about how things are going are going to set them up better for being more resilient leaders, more resilient organizations, and in a time of crisis, feeling like they actually can come and get the support that they need. Certainly, if you can give more money at a moment of crisis, that is incredibly important and needed, or moving up a disbursement if there is a cash flow issue. But then the third is using your social capital. We had a funder in Philadelphia who gave us a bit of gap funding, but then tried to organize other funders to get involved as well. I had a long conversation with Josh Stearns, who's right over here from Democracy Fund, and he realized right away, this was sort of at the very beginning, he was one of the first people I talked to when I realized what a terrible situation we were in. He realized right away that I needed support and guidance, and so told me to call Kate, gave me the names and numbers of other leaders, just for me to be able to get some support that I needed at that moment. And so that's another role that funders can play. You guys are incredibly well connected in this industry. And so seeing kind of what your grantees might need even when they can't potentially see it.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And Shamus, I want to ask you about, because this hits home for a lot of us, is the importance of diversifying your funding stream. And can you talk about how that model's worked for you so far?
Yes, I think one of the big takeaways from the DNAInfo closing was, we had all our eggs in one basket, and that did not work out. So we've been really, really intentional about just trying to come up with just as many different revenue streams as possible. But we always lead with the reader support. That's what got us off the ground. When we announced that we were coming back, we did a Kickstarter, and we coordinated it pretty well, again with some help from local media that wanted to see us get back off the ground. And we had, we hit our goal by 11 a.m. the day we announced it, and by the end of the month we had 3,000 people that had donated at least $50, and they got a year's long subscription, and they were founding members. And so, from the beginning, the number one thing has to be the readers. We felt, as we learned, if you don't go to the readers and ask them to support what they find valuable, it's not going to work. For us, we had to go and say, if you found this valuable when we were this before, and it got taken away from you, would you be willing to step up and support it, because it's expensive? So readers are our number one. First couple years, we were like 70% reader funded because we were still figuring out the other revenue streams. But now we're getting closer to our ideal, where we'd like to be 25% readers, 25% advertising, 25% donations, 25% philanthropy. So, if there's any of those sort of get shaken, that the others can help prop it up. But that's really our ideal. We're getting close to it, but it's always got to be, to us it's always about, this is what we do, this is what we bring to the table, this is the mission. We're going to cover your neighborhoods. We're going to do the things that that the TV stations don't do. We're going to cover neighborhoods, not just when somebody gets shot. We're going to cover neighborhoods like every other neighborhood. Like I said, like a small town community paper. Anything that moves that's interesting that people would want to read, we'll write about. So that's our continuous message, is that, and we're not shy about leaning back on, this all got taken away from you once, don't let it happen again. So, I don't know how long we can do that. It's been 7 years. But it does resonate with people as well. And people come up to us with like the original Kickstarter tote bag and say, I'm a founding member, I've been with you from the beginning. And we love those people, because it's like, oh, thank God, you trusted us that we wouldn't screw this up again. So that's really the ideal, is just try to mix it in there as well as we can. We do events that have been brought in some money. We do lots of merch. It's not a huge money maker, but it's a fun one, because seeing someone at a Cubs game wearing our Gator Watch 2019 shirt from when they found a stray alligator in the Chicago Lagoon. We just try to be quick, particularly for like fun news stories that people can get behind. Like the Gator, we broke that story, and I tell the story too much, so sorry if you all have heard it. But we broke that story, and like Chicago was fascinated because we don't have alligators. I know we're in Florida, and this is not of interest at all to you, but we don't have alligators in Chicago. So when we had one, it was like, what's going on? So we made a T-shirt, and we sold 4,000 of them. It made $100,000. We were able to hire another reporter, and that's it's sort of like the message we like to give to people. It's like, if you do this, we can do that, and that's very helpful in the messaging too. Is that we're not gonna grow, we're not gonna grow more than we can afford. We can't. But if you were to get us to this level, we can hire another reporter, and that's what we did with the Kickstarter. We said, hey, this is going great. We've got a stretch goal. If we hit this, we will hire a fifth neighborhood reporter at launch. And that helped us get to where we were. And we hired him. He's still with us. No Gators since 2019, though. So.
Yeah, we'll have to find our version in Houston, but Gators is
do a T-shirt if you do.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I know for us, we just did a community event, a live event. Meg Infinity, who's here, works with the Landing, and I can't tell you the price, the value that being able to do an event in the community and bring your journalists in there to meet members of the community. It goes without saying, but just the way it touches folks, because they see you, there's something, the personal relationship about people seeing you in person, that you're a journalist, that you're invested in the community, really is critical. So I'm glad you mentioned that and everything you're doing, but events for us has been great. Gene, I wanted to go back to you on the point, because through the crisis management, because there's also a thing that's critical, and I've seen this just over the years in newsrooms that I've been involved in, but it's managing the message externally and internally, how your folks as leaders, folks going to turn to us to see how we look, how we're talking, or shoulders slumping, but also how you say, hey, listen, there's going to be a path forward, a transparency here. Can you talk about just things that work, best practices on managing that message internally and externally?
Yeah. So internally, as I mentioned, I was really candid and transparent. I also owned my responsibility in this, despite it being, mistakes that were made by our COO. At the end of the day, the responsibility lies with me because I'm executive director, and I owned that. And it is a hard lesson learned, and I will never take my eye off of that ball again. And so we gave our staff a real clear understanding of what happened. And I think that really mattered, because after the layoffs, we've had a 100% retention rate. No one left on their own afterwards. And I think it's because they felt confident in not only the plan that we had moving forward, but in Sarah and I as leaders. Externally, we were clear that we couldn't do silent layoffs, which happens a lot in this industry. And I understand why, because to be honest, like it would have been easier for me if we had done silent layoffs, right? It's a lot easier to not have to publicly put yourself out there and say that this thing that you started and ran is perhaps crumbling to the ground. But at the end of the day, that's not what this is about. It's not about me, and it's not even about, at that moment, it's not even about Resolve's brand. It's about the people and our team. And so we issued a statement when we did the layoffs. It was brief, but I made 3 points. One, I own the decisions that were made and said, the board kind of had overall control in sort of the scenarios that we move forward through, but the personnel decisions were mine, and owned the mistakes and the decisions that were made. Second point was to say that while this is really hard, this is what's needed to keep the work that's important to Philadelphians alive. And so, this is gut-wrenching, and also this is the only thing that is going to move us forward, and that is the most important thing, right? That is my job, is to sustain the work in some way, the work that's deeply impactful and important for underrepresented communities in Philadelphia. And then I spent those were each maybe 2 sentences. And then the bulk of the statement was to say, because it was 100% true, that there was not a single person who was being laid off because they weren't performing well. That if you are a fan of the work of Resolve, if you admire what we've done over the years, then you are a fan of these people. It is an incredible team, and every single one of them was excelling at their job. And we had to let them go because, as we said in our strategic plan, they weren't core to the work moving forward. And so we issued that statement. And then we also, and I also, as folks who had been laid off were posting on LinkedIn, for example, saying that they'd been laid off, they were looking for more work, I would repost all of those and, give them basically a shout out and say this person is great for X, and X reasons. I gave myself a 3-week deadline, and I wrote personal letters of reference for every single person that we laid off and sent it to them, and have since sent it to employers, because Sarah and I are actively helping folks find other work. If they're applying to a place where we have connections, we write to folks, we serve as references, we check in with folks. I'm really happy to say that about half of the staff that we laid off now has new jobs. There's a few others who are in finalist conversations, a few others who are actually not, pursuing work at this time, but we are actively keeping track of that so that we can help folks move forward. And that's how we, handled it. And I think that meant a lot, both to the folks that we had to let go of, and again, for the folks in our newsroom, because it's a really, up until this point, we had a very, very high retention rate at Resolve. Very few people kind of left on their own, so it was a really tight-knit group, and everyone was friends, and so I think it also meant a lot to the staff who stayed to know that we were still trying to support the folks who we had to let go. And so at the end of the day, we are a smaller team, we are a leaner team, but we're still surviving, we're still moving forward. And it was a terrible couple of weeks, but again, going back to those sort of value-based and data-based decisions, that's what got us through.
But you're leaving a legacy, because you're also, you had planned as you depart too, but you're leaving a legacy because you made sure you invested in helping your colleagues and your team get moved forward too if they needed to.
Yeah,
Exactly. You can't beat that, so thank you for sharing that so openly. Shamus, So you've talked about the way you've diversified the merch, everything you're doing here, and how you move forward. What can you share about, like, it's not a trick question, but what's keeping you up at night? Just because we all go through that, Lord knows.
What isn't keeping me up at night?
It's just,
I mean,
what
yeah,
takeaways can you share from
I always say it's like the news. Like you're as good as your last story. You got to do it. You got to wake up and do it again. And it's the same thing with finding funding for it. So I mean, number one would be just sustainability. Not screwing it up. Not trying to get too far ahead of ourselves. So we've tried to be slow and steady about it. We've just been very intentional. We have our hiring process is extremely slow because we just want to make sure, like, okay, where is that money going to come from? We've had some foundations have been fantastic about saying, like, this is an underserved neighborhood in Chicago. They're historically underrepresented, especially by the media, but by everything else. We would support a reporter in that neighborhood. But we were like, okay, but what happens after year one? How do we get back to that? So we have been very intentional about how we add positions, because the last thing I want to do is go through what happened at DNAInfo. So yes, I mean, sustainability keeps me up. Everything, but we try to. It's fun though. You just gotta. I'm glad to have all these people covering Chicago now, and that's what makes me proud. Is not only are we getting a lot of great stories out there and spreading what we hope is like the true narrative of Chicago, not the what you hear outside of the borders, but what Chicagoans know about what's great about Chicago and what's the challenges of Chicago, and then being fair throughout the neighborhoods, that we're not just going to the neighborhoods where we're more likely to get subscribers. We try to put reporters everywhere to make it fair. So yeah, I would just say, like, doing it right, getting it right. I mean, that's the job one of a news organization, is getting it right. So that's that's one of the many things. But yeah,
Thank you.
I used to sleep better.
So we wanted to open up the questions here. We got, let me see our clock here, about 12 minutes left. So we just don't want to be sitting here and talking. So if you've got any questions, I want to pass the mic over to you.
And there's mics there too.
Oh yeah, there's mics there. There you go, Liza. At the
Right. Liza, on the floor.
Sorry about that.
Yes. So again, I'm Liza Gross. I'm a member of the Board of Resolve, and it's not a question. I just want to round off some comments that Jean made, because I know that Jean and Sarah are never going to say this about themselves. But the positive outcome and the positive response from funders did not happen by happenstance or by chance, and I hope Josh Stearns agrees with me. It was the result of building up a trust relationship with the funders, being there, keeping in touch for little things, for big things, the strategy that I call sending bonbons and roses. Here is what we've done. We would like you to be here. Thank you very much. Not just taking the grant and then never showing up, and also being fiduciary responsible, meeting deadlines for reports, not missing meetings with funders. So that, I think, made it possible also for the funders to have, they believed in that reputation that Jean had built, and Sarah, who joined us recently, but amply demonstrated her commitment and her way, that she could step up to do things. So I just wanted to underscore that, because I know that they are never going to say it for themselves, but leadership matters, and staying with it matters, and keeping communication with funders in the good times comes in very handy for the bad times. And the second point I wanted to make, I don't know if he's still here, but there were also other members of the community that stepped up in other ways to help restructure the landscape when Jean reached out for help. It wasn't only Manny, Dean Boardman of Temple. I just wanted to shout out, he left. But there are other ways in which, when we face a crisis, there are other people that can help in different ways, and we should be thinking creatively about who these individuals are and how we're going to reach out to them and what we're going to ask them to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Liza. Because this is the small world of journalism. Liza was my boss in Miami at the Herald. Went away with it.
Never thought I would see Manny outside Miami.
Any questions? Anything else? Anybody else? Okay.
Okay, so hi, I'm Rachel Pedersen from The Forward. I just have a specific question that I hope is of interest to people in this room. You talked about how you changed your board, you evolved your board, and this is for anybody on the panel who wants to address it. Can you talk a little bit about how you managed that evolution from your friends to a sort of stronger group of wider supporters?
Yeah. I will try to be quick. So some of it was, there was some turnover. We, did more recruitment, brought new folks in, but some of it was actually just development of current members. Liza has been on the board since the beginning. She is a friend and a mentor, and also, that is not now why she sits on the board. And so I'll say maybe three things. I mean, first of all, this was literally my Salzburger project of last year, was like focusing on board development, so there's a lot that went into it. But three key things. One, I needed to change my perspective on the board, right? I needed to get in the mentality of, rather than saying, hey, can you do me this favor by sitting on this board, to I am giving you the opportunity to be on the leadership body of this incredible organization. And that was very powerful. And so it moved from, board recruitment moved from me reaching out to folks and having casual conversations to a recruitment committee on the board who does a whole interview process. Like, it is basically like being hired for a job now. And I think even that shift from the very beginning sets a really different precedent for incoming members. Second, what I learned is that so I'm a community organizer at heart. That's what I did during high school and college. And it's like, board development is like community organizing. Like, you just got to organize them. You got to get them to realize that they are, in this together. We're all working for the same goal. And there is not a one-size-fits-all approach, in the sense that, we have board members who are retired and have a lot of time on their hands. We have other folks who are working full-time jobs and they have young kids, and understanding how each can plug in different ways without it just being, okay, everyone needs to commit this amount of time at this time during the year, but really figuring out what are not only like the leverage points for how they can do the most for the organization, but also what are like the actual practical ways that they can engage that feels comfortable for them in their lives and sustainable. And then the third is building some real cohesion amongst the group itself. So in the first, several years, Cassie and I had really great relationships with everyone on the board, and we, were able to go to them for strategic reasons, but there wasn't as much of sort of a group sense of self. And so we did, at the end of 2023, we did, an all-day retreat together. I had them do some conversations together where they, asked each other questions that just kind of got them doing relationship building outside of the work of Resolve. And that really mattered. So yeah, those are kind of my biggest takeaways from board development. Madeline.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Madeline Bear. I'm the founding director of DNAInfo, and first of all, I just want to thank you, Jean, for talking about this. I'm sure it's...
Do you want to give her that one?
Take this one.
Testing. All right, thank you. First of all, I just want to thank Eugene for talking about this. I'm sure it's not easy, and I want to underline something that you said, which is like we all learn from the challenges and mistakes, and it's I wish there were more spaces and that we could have relationships with funders to be more vulnerable and talk about, when times aren't going so well. I do have a question. So my organization covers and serves Latino and Mayan immigrants in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the communities that we serve are facing significant crises right now, and our organization is really working to make sure that by reporting with and for and about Latino immigrants, we are not exacerbating those crises, we are not putting them either further at risk, and that we can scenario plan for the potential risks of our organization or our staff being at risk. And I know that this conversation is about kind of how you responded to a crisis, but I also wonder if you have advice around speaking with funders about kind of how they can support us to prevent crises that we can foresee as potentially on the horizon. Thank you.
Do you want to take it or should I? Okay. I do have a few thoughts. So I think, one is first going to that place of, okay, what are the things you as an organization might need to be prepared with and for, that is not just, okay, we need to make sure we're keeping money coming in through the door. So whether that is, legal support, whether it is board development, because, at some point it may be the board that needs to take some action. If there is an attack on you from the Trump administration and you're gonna, pursue a lawsuit against them, that needs to be a decision of the board, right? And so is your board in a space where they could make capable decisions like that? So yeah, legal support, board development, doing some of that scenario planning and saying, okay, what are the things around the edges that funders, that I could pitch to very specifically, that I could go to a funder and pitch very specifically, because I know this. There are, most of our funders at least have they have discretionary funds, emergency funds, whatever they want to call it. They have some money that they are able to release for very specific things. Maybe it is, an actual emergency crisis, or maybe it is, look, we have this need because of this changing context in the world. Is there any space that you see for this? And so I think, first of all, it's just like not being afraid to ask, which I know you're not, but framing that ask in a way that makes it clear that one, the outside context has changed, and so that's why you need this additional fund, and it can't just sort of serve from the general operating support that you already have from them, and that you have a real clear plan for how that's going to move forward and why it's needed. So that would be my suggestion, but just starting to have those conversations now, even if you're not totally clear yet on what that ask would be, say, hey, we are facing A, B, and C. I'm doing some scenario planning to figure out what we possibly need to shore ourselves up. How can we continue this conversation into the future, essentially? What are the ways, how can you support? Because at the end of the day, right, funders are in this with us. They have invested in the work because they believe in it. The last thing they really want is for it to go away. So yeah, just starting that communication as soon as possible.
And just, can I piggyback off that? Yeah. Just don't be afraid to ask. When we started Block Club, it was 3 journalists, Jen Sabella, Stephanie Lulay, and myself. We were not good at asking people for help. Certainly not good at asking people for money. And we've sort of learned and been coached that you gotta keep asking. You gotta keep asking for support, especially, as a nonprofit. Like we go out to our readers frequently, and we try to be as transparent as possible about this is what we're trying to do, or this is why we did this is why we did that. But just making sure that we're like constantly letting them know that, we need reader support, we need donation, we need funder support, we need foundation support, we need all of this, and just sort of getting over ourselves that we this is uncomfortable asking. So that's one of the key lessons was just like you just gotta keep asking people for help.
I'm glad you mentioned. I love the work that you're doing. In fact, we were talking about your work in our newsroom yesterday. Our board knows that we've had an emphasis on Spanish language being, well, not just in Houston, but just for our area. We've been very deliberate in our hiring to have not just that they can speak Spanish, be able to write in Spanish. We have grant proposals in front of individual organizations who are really interested in funding Spanish language news. Now you'd figure we're in Houston, so Univision, Telemundo, no criticism on them, Spanish language radio, they do a good job. The amount of traffic that the Houston Landing got during hurricanes, during Hurricane Beryl, during May's Derecho, which was a really bad storm, and writing about DACA, schools, everything immigration has taken off. So as a result of that, to your point, we're not shy about, we're seeing these numbers because we're not gaming them. Okay, who wants to be able to put their money and support the translations and the work that we're doing here? So it's just a matter of, if you see an opportunity, get in front of somebody. It's like going to bat. You got to swing. You know, you may not get a hit every time, but you just got to be able to do that. So thank you for the work that you're doing there, because we're seeing the results in our community as a public service. Here, come take. Oh, come. Of course.
Hi, my name is Jeanette Agerson. I'm the publisher of a local news site in Vancouver, Canada, called The Tyee. And I would love to hear a bit more from Jean, if you're okay with sharing. This could be a much longer conversation. But how you threaded the needle of fully telling your team what happened without necessarily throwing someone under the bus who exists on your team. And also dealing with some internal, like, resentment or anger for the outcome of those things, and like how you hold people through that, or like come through on the other side.
Yep, it's a great question. I know that doors are open, and so if folks want to go, I will try to be succinct, and then we can talk a little bit afterwards. That was a really, really hard one for me. My first instinct was to not tell the staff or anyone sort of the role that our COO played. And then I, again, got some great advice that, like, Jean, you can't. Like, this is so abrupt and it's so sudden and it's so much that if you don't give some explanation, an honest explanation, the staff who you're asking to stay would have left, because they would have thought, what is going on here? I mean, I literally laid off someone who 10 days before I had been talking to about a promotion. And I still can't piece together everything that happened. There was no embezzlement. There was no, we're not talking about anything untoward. It was just someone who I think got in over her head, got really scared, and then just created a different reality than the one that we were living in. So, you know, I basically just got the advice that, like, you just have to be clear and you have to own your part of it. Again, like, I know I was her manager, I was her boss. I knew we were in a bad fundraising year, and I should have known exactly, I should have known. So I think those two things of just like, I just kind of had to, given this specific situation. If it was something else, maybe I wouldn't have. There was absolutely anger on the team and resentment on the team, and that is, like, I can't control that. My job was to explain what happened, to, you know, be held accountable myself, and to try to move forward. And yeah, I mean, we've, you know, had conversations on the team since then. You know, we've opened up space. First of all, we opened up spaces both, like, after I told folks at the end of that long day, I said, look, I will just be in my office for people who want to come and ask some questions. We had other times set aside during staff meetings for folks to ask any questions that they wanted to, and I tried to answer as honestly as possible. It is a really like tough needle to thread, and that's how I chose to thread it in this specific situation. It might be different some other time, but given this, it just, like, I couldn't see a path forward without being honest about what happened.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. We'll be around if you've got any other questions. I think we're a little bit over time, but we're gonna thank you so much for coming here, and we'll hang out here and if you got any other questions. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.